Who raised you more, your parents, your grandparents, or someone else?
They sent me a postcard from Greece, bright and cheerful and full of the kind of fake casual joy that people use when they want you to know they are doing fine without you. And I stood in my kitchen turning it in my hands while the sink dripped and the clock clicked, and I heard my mother's voice in my head saying that money was tight and timing was bad and maybe next month. And I thought about how next month had been the answer for almost a year while my rent crept up, my savings thinned out. And my calls went to voicemail because everyone was suddenly in a meeting or in traffic or in a mood. I read the note twice and the signatures once, because they had signed it with all their names like a group photo you did not pose for, and when I saw the little line about, "Wish you were here," I laughed in a way that did not sound like me at all. Because they knew perfectly well that I had asked for help with one very specific thing that was time-sensitive and practical and not even a gift, just a bridge loan while I changed apartments after the landlord jacked up the price with a notice that gave me barely any breathing room, and they had told me that there simply was not anything to spare and that I should learn to be more independent, which is rich coming from people who have treated me like an extra card in a wallet whenever airline miles were involved. I kept thinking about the last actual conversation with my mother, where she did the soft, disappointed tone and said that I was dramatic and that everyone was struggling and that I should consider moving back in for a while. Which sounds generous until you remember that their house is not a house so much as a set of rules with walls, and also that my stepfather has opinions about everything from the placement of salt to the volume of the television, so the offer comes with a cost. And while I was nodding on the phone, I already knew I would find another way, which meant late nights selling furniture online and taking every extra shift and telling myself it would mean something one day. So here is the part one did not expect. Holding that postcard, I realized they were not just careless, they were deliberate, because people do not go to Greece on accident, and they do not mail a postcard on accident either. And if you have ever been on the wrong end of family politics, you know that silence would have been kinder than a happy note with a stamp and a view, and in that moment something lined up inside me, and I felt the click of a door that had been loose on its hinges for years. Finally closing, not softly, and once it closed I saw my own situation with a kind of mean clarity that surprised me. I remembered how my sister borrowed my credit card for a one-time emergency, and somehow stayed on it as an authorized user because removing her would be awkward, and how the family phone plan still lived under my name because it started that way years ago when I got the better discount and no one wanted to do the paperwork to switch it, and how too small auto payments. One for a storage unit full of boxes my mother swore she would deal with, and one for a streaming service everyone uses, except me, have been nibbling at my account for so long that I stopped seeing the bites, which is what happens when you normalize being the convenient one. I set the postcard down, opened my laptop, and signed into the phone account with the password I have changed for them more times than I can count, and I stared at the list of lines with their little labels, Mom, Rick, and my sister Lauren. And I hovered for a second because there is always that voice that says be nice and be patient and be a team player. And then I clicked the button that removes a line, and then I clicked it again, and then I changed the account password and the security questions to things only I would know, and I sat back and let the reality sink in that I was done subsidizing people who only remember me when they need an airport ride. Because while that may sound petty, it is actually the first clean boundary I have drawn in years, and it felt less like revenge and more like closing a tab I never meant to open. Then I went to the bank site and took my sister off the card, and I called the storage unit and requested the account be transferred to the primary user listed on the contract, who, funny enough, was not me. And when the manager said it would result in a lock if the new payment did not arrive by the end of the week, I said that would be fine and gave him my sister's email and my mother's phone number, and, for the first time in a long time, I did not follow it with an apology or a buffer or a promise to smooth things over, because I am done being the family customer support line. When I picked up the postcard again, I noticed the postmark stamp had smudged across the corner and left a faint line over the printed blue water. And for a second, I almost felt that old tug to send a polite reply with a smiley face and a "we'll catch up when you're back," but instead I turned it over and, in the only space the printers had left blank, I wrote a new mailing address for me. A simple little box I had set up that morning because I was tired of my mail wandering through their house like a stray cat. And as I wrote it, I remembered something my grandmother told me years ago about keeping your papers where people cannot misplace them for you, and that thought led me to a memory I had not touched in a while, which is my grandmother's folder with the trust documents that my stepfather rushed me to sign after the funeral when I was too sad and too exhausted to read every page. I stood there with the postcard in one hand and that memory in the other, and I realized I knew exactly which box in the hall closet held those papers, the one with my old notebooks and the letter opener and the receipts I kept meaning to sort. And I felt the kind of steady energy that shows up when anger has cooled into purpose, so I put the postcard on the counter, walked to the closet, pulled down the box, and saw, right on top of everything, an envelope with my name on it in my stepfather's handwriting and a note clipped to the front that said, "Backup copy, do not discard," which is when my phone buzzed with a text from my sister that said she could not make calls and did I touch something, and I looked at the envelope and thought, not yet. And I texted back that I was busy, and then I slid my finger under the seal and started to open it. The envelope gave way with that soft tear that always makes you wonder if you are doing the right thing even when you know you are. And inside, I found the neat stack of copies my stepfather keeps for everything because he loves paper trails when he thinks the trail belongs to him, and there it was in black and white with headings that sound more complicated than they are. A schedule of assets and an amendment date and a paragraph that named me, not in the vague, sentimental way families use when they talk about legacy, but by full legal name and mailing address as a beneficiary with rights to request an accounting and to inspect records of income, which would have been a nice surprise years ago if anyone had bothered to say it out loud when I was not grieving and signing whatever was put in front of me while people brought casseroles and told me to rest. I kept reading even though my hands wanted to close the envelope and pretend I had not seen anything, and I saw a property description that was familiar in a way that made my chest feel tight. A small duplex with a boring street name that my grandmother used to call her little safety net, the kind of place that quietly pays for groceries and emergency dentist visits and never asks for attention. And there were copies of rent statements for the year after she died that showed regular deposits. Labeled owner distribution, which is a polite phrase for checks that apparently went out every month to the trustee, and I had to sit down because while they were telling me there was nothing extra and I should learn to be more independent, they were cashing rent from a building my grandmother had promised would help me finish school, or start a business, or survive a bad year without drowning, and somehow in the fog of funerals and boxes, and the fast way families move on when money is involved, I missed the moment where that building became a private faucet they turned on and off without telling me the handle was in my name too. I opened my laptop, found the county recorder website, and typed slowly because I did not want to be wrong, and it took a few tries to get the parcel search to cooperate. And then the deed popped up with that unromantic language I now understand better than I ever wanted to, and it listed my name as a grantee along with a trust name that reads like a password you never picked. And it hit me that the rent checks did not just skip me, they stepped on me, because those checks made the difference. Between me moving in a panic and me moving with a plan, and in that moment I decided I would not ask for a conversation or a family meeting or a calm explanation that blames miscommunication and promises better. I would speak the only language that ever gets a fast answer in my family, which is the language that comes with tracking numbers and certified receipts and deadlines that make your stomach hurt. Before I did anything official, I called the property management company listed on the statements, and I expected a fight, but the woman who answered was professional in that way that makes you feel safe if you are on the right side of the facts. And after I verified myself with the data the documents gave me, I asked a very simple thing that still felt like a lightning strike inside my chest, which was to place a temporary hold on owner distributions pending updated ownership contact information and an accounting request from a named beneficiary, and I offered to email the deed page and my identification while we were on the phone so there would be no delay. And she said she could flag the account and route payments to escrow for now and copy legal on the note so no one could claim surprise, and I thanked her in a voice that probably sounded calmer than I felt. Because there are moments when the ground that was under your feet shifts in your favor and you are scared to move. In case it shifts back. I hung up and wrote the first letter in plain language that did not apologize for existing, a demand for an accounting that cited the exact clause on the page I had open, along with a request for copies of bank statements related to the trust for the period after my grandmother's death and a notice that all correspondence should be sent to my new mailing address, which I underline not because I am dramatic, but because people in my family love to lose mail when it is inconvenient, and then I did one more thing that felt small and mean and absolutely necessary, which was to freeze my credit with the 3 bureaus that send too many emails, because somewhere between the card I let my sister use and the phone plan that lived under my name, I learned that convenience is the door people step through when they do not want to ask permission. While the letters printed, I logged into the utility accounts tied to the duplex, because the file gave me the account numbers like a gift from a past version of me who was paying attention even when I did not think I was. And I changed the mailing address on the tax bill portal to my box so the next envelope with numbers they prefer not to think about would arrive where they could not hide it behind a stack of catalogs. And I sat there looking at the little confirmations and feeling a quiet kind of heat that was not rage anymore. It was resolve, and I knew I had crossed an invisible line I never dared to approach before, because I had always been the one who asked nicely and waited politely and took the scraps when people told me the main course was for someone else. When the printer finished and the stack cooled under my hand, I slid the letters into envelopes, wrote the names carefully so I would not add any mess to a situation that had been messy enough. And as I sealed the last one, my phone lit up with a notification from an unfamiliar law firm that used a subject line with the trust name and the word inquiry, and for a long breath I watched it sit there without tapping. And then I placed it face down on the table and walked to the door with the envelopes because, for once, they could wait. I mailed the envelopes by certified mail because I knew from long experience that arguments fade when signatures do not. And while the clerk stamped the green cards and slid them back across the counter, I felt that odd mix of nerves and relief that comes when you finally stop asking for fairness and start documenting it. And as I walked out with the receipts tucked in my wallet, my phone buzzed again with that same law firm name in the preview line, which I ignored for one more block because I wanted my head clear before I stepped into the kind of conversation where every word will be measured later by someone who bills for measuring. Back at the kitchen table, I opened the message and found a careful paragraph that introduced a partner with a surname that reads like a plaque on a dark wall, and in polite language, he asked for a time to discuss recent correspondence and beneficiary concerns, which sounded soothing until you translate it into family speak where it means we see you, we are regrouping, and we want you back in the room where we talk you into being smaller. So instead of replying, I forwarded the email to a friend who once went through a messy estate fight and asked for the number of the woman who pulled her through it. And within an hour, I had a consultation booked for the next morning with someone who did not promise a miracle, but did say that beneficiaries have rights even when the trustee behaves like a gatekeeper, which was the first sentence in weeks that landed like water instead of smoke. Before the call, I made a list because I know myself and I know that anger can make you forget your points. So I wrote down every place the paper overlapped the truth I remembered, the duplex distributions that never reached me, the phone plan and the card and the storage unit that trained me to carry everyone's small debts, the conversation after the funeral when I signed an amendment I could not fully see through tears, and the recent messages where my mother used the phrase hard times while booking flights to a place with islands and olives, and when the attorney came on the line, she let me talk for a long time without correcting my pacing or softening the parts that sounded ugly. And then she did what I needed most, which was to sort the mess into steps that do not care about family tone, starting with a formal demand for an accounting that triggers a deadline, followed by a notice that any distributions must be held until that accounting is delivered, and a warning that if records show misuse or self-dealing, we will petition for removal and surcharge. And because she knows how people dodge responsibility, she added that all contact must go to a new mailing address and email controlled by me alone, which is not just about logistics. It is about not letting them pull me back into group chats where everything becomes a misunderstanding. After we hung up, I drafted her version of my letter with the state citations she dictated in plain English. And while the printer did its slow choreography, I opened a folder on my laptop and started a timeline because one thing I learned from working with managers is that dates make bad behavior visible in a way that emotion cannot. And when I laid the rent statements next to my bank balance over the same months, the picture stopped being abstract and became a simple pattern where money that should have cushioned me flowed somewhere else with a regular rhythm that looked almost tender if you forget the person missing from the line of recipients. And in that calm space, I realized there was one more strand I had to pull, which was the tax account for the property, because people who like control also like to control who opens the bills. So I called the county and updated the mailing address and requested electronic copies of the last few years. And when the clerk asked if I wanted lien notices delivered to me as well, I said yes, because even if there are no liens, I want to be the person who knows first. By afternoon, the property manager called to confirm that the owner distributions had been routed to escrow and that all future payments would sit there until instructions came from counsel. And I thanked her in a voice that probably sounded steadier than I felt, because she had just told me the checks that played hide and seek would no longer be hiding. And on that same call, she mentioned that tenants had been told nothing because they do not need to be part of this, which mattered to me because I am not interested in blowing up a quiet street to make a point. I am interested in a quiet point that changes everything. The last move of the day was small and surgical and a little wicked in a way that made me almost smile, because I still had access to the shared travel itinerary app my mother loves to use whenever she wants everyone to admire the schedule. And there sitting on my screen were their return flight numbers and arrival time and the note about a rideshare pickup. So I signed the engagement letter my attorney sent, paid the retainer without asking anyone for approval, and scheduled a process server to meet that rideshare lane with a packet that included the demand for accounting, the notice of suspended distributions, and a letter that listed my new forwarding address in bold above the firm's letterhead. And as I set the service window and added a photo of my stepfather pulled from an old holiday album I should have deleted years ago, the server replied with a simple confirmation and a promise to text me when the papers were in his hand, which is the message that lit my screen just as the plane icon on the app ticked from in-flight to landed. The process server's text came with a timestamp and a photo that caught my stepfather at the curb with his suitcase half unzipped, and that expression he gets when a plan stops obeying him. And while my screen filled with the little bubble of an incoming call from my mother that I did not answer because I had already promised myself that anything important would travel on paper, I sat very still and listened to the quiet hum of the house as if it were clearing its throat before saying something I had needed to hear for years, which was that I was not going to explain or apologize anymore. I was simply going to act and let the documents speak in the steady voice that people like them have always respected more than mine. Their attorney finally wrote incomplete sentences instead of soothing hints, offering the kind of "let us all be reasonable" message that usually ends with me signing something I have not had time to read. And even though the letter tried to frame my request for an accounting as a misunderstanding born of grief and distance, it also did the thing I was waiting for, which was to confirm that distributions had been made to the trustee routinely since the month after my grandmother's funeral, and that those payments had been used for trust administration and necessary expenses, a phrase so broad it could swallow a vacation if you are not careful. So I forwarded the message to my attorney and asked her to attach it to the file under the header they love to use in their world, which is admissions against interest, and then I put my phone down and went back to the part that keeps me focused, which is the list. I called the insurance carrier for the duplex because beneficiary rights do not mean much if a burst pipe gets cute while people argue. And I requested to be added as a loss payee and additional insured, so that any check with my building's name on it would have to learn mine as well. And while the representative clicked through her screens, I pictured my stepfather learning that insurance notices would now arrive at an address he did not control, and I felt the small but unmistakable pleasure of being the person who knows where the fire extinguisher lives, because I am not here to set fires. I am here to stop the quiet kinds that spread in drawers and glove compartments where people stash the mail they do not want to deal with. The property manager returned my call with a tone that made me like her even more, because she sounded both precise and a little amused. And when I asked for vendor histories, she emailed me a spreadsheet with maintenance charges that read like a diary of a building that behaved itself. Except for a handful of line items labeled consulting and reimbursement that matched dates my family posted photos of long weekends, and she told me gently that while she does not audit owners, she saw enough oddities to feel relieved that payments were now pointed to escrow and that a lawyer was named, which is manager code for you are cleaning up what someone else has been spilling, and I thanked her and promised not to drag tenants into the mess. Because this is not about punishing people who pay on time and fix their sinks with care. When the certified receipts updated to show signatures, my attorney filed a petition that did not waste adjectives. A simple demand for an accounting within a statutory window and a request that the court suspend any discretionary distributions until the numbers are on the table, and because paperwork is the lever that moves heavy things in my family. She also recorded a notice linked to the property that, while far from dramatic, had the practical effect of making sure no one could borrow against or quietly transfer anything without a clerk somewhere sending me a copy first, which is not the nuclear option they will accuse me of. It is a seatbelt I should have buckled years ago, and if that seatbelt leaves a mark on their plans, well, welcome to physics. The silence that followed was not the peaceful kind. It was the tactical kind that happens when people who prefer to talk down at you realize they cannot get you back into the living room without a witness. And on the second day of nothing, my sister tried a different door with a text that said she missed me and we should talk like family, which landed like a message from a neighbor you know was in the room when your package went missing. And while a part of me wanted to write back with a whole story of how exhausted I am and how I never wanted to make a scene, the stronger part of me remembered that scenes are exactly what they want because scenes can be dismissed as mood. So I replied with a new firm email and said that all trust questions should go there, and then I turned my phone face down and made tea because I have learned that small rituals keep your hands from picking up old habits. Late that afternoon, their lawyer returned with an offer shaped like a lifeline and barbed like a hook. A proposal for a family resolution that involved a modest payment to me labeled goodwill and a mutual non-disparagement clause that would keep everything quiet forever, and even though a check with my name on it would have solved a few very immediate problems. I looked at the draft and thought about my grandmother's neat handwriting on those older pages and about the months I lost to believing I was asking for too much when really I was asking for what already had my name on it, so I sent back a 2-paragraph answer that did not blink, one line offering to accept the trustee's resignation. The next listing the records we would need before any release could be discussed, and then I added a deadline that was not dramatic, just firm, because I have learned that sometimes the respectful thing is to give people a clock they can hear. An hour later, my inbox blinked with a counter that asked for more time and fewer demands and a conversation by phone so we could preserve relationships, and I felt that old tug in my ribs that says be nice and make it easy. And I almost typed a gentle compromise because I am still me under all this paper, but then the county email arrived with the property tax copies I had requested. And as I scanned the attachments, I saw a reimbursement entry with my stepfather's initials next to airfare and hospitality that matched the dates on that postcard from Greece, and I stopped typing mid-word and copied the page into a new folder labeled Exhibits, because there are moments when the universe hands you a straight line and it would be rude not to finish it. And I told their lawyer that extensions would end at noon on the 3rd business day, after which the petition to remove would be filed without further notice, and when I hit send, my doorbell rang with a courier envelope I had not expected. A thick one from a bank I recognized from my grandmother's statements, which is how I found myself holding my breath and sliding a thumb under the seal, wondering if the thing inside was proof that I had been right or bait that I could not afford to swallow. The bank envelope turned out to be the kind of quiet bomb that does not make noise when it lands because it knows the paper will do the talking. A packet of monthly statements from the fiduciary account that showed regular rent deposits from the duplex followed by withdrawals labeled reimbursements, travel, and incidentals that lined up almost perfectly with the dates on the postcard and the photos they posted during that long bright week overseas, and tucked in the back was a stale change of address form never mailed, which meant the bank had been ready to update beneficiary contact years ago if someone had only put a stamp on it, so I took a slow breath, scanned every page, and forwarded the file to my attorney with a short note that said, "I believe we have our timeline," after which I did something that would have terrified me a year ago, but felt simple now, which was to call the bank's fiduciary services line. Identify myself using the deed and the trust schedule already in the record, and request a hold on the debit card attached to the account, along with a requirement that any future disbursement above a modest amount require dual authorization or a court order, and the representative, who had heard every version of family weather, placed the hold while keeping her voice even, then gave me a reference number I wrote on the green return receipts like a small shield. Their lawyer reacted exactly the way a person reacts when the elevator door closes on their sleeve, with polite panic dressed as concern for everyone's time. And he asked for yet another extension and offered a call to explain the context of the travel charges. But context is the blanket word people use when the numbers are ugly, so my attorney replied with 3 sentences that did not raise her voice. The accounting was due, the hold would remain, and any further delay would be attached to a petition for removal and surcharge, along with exhibits labeled neatly by month. Then she added a line that I loved more than I should, which was that all future correspondence should use my new mailing address, and that any attempt to communicate through family text threads would be ignored, because boundaries are not real until they live in writing. The deadline arrived and passed with one last email that tried to turn this into a misunderstanding between sisters rather than a matter between a beneficiary and a trustee. So the petition went in at 9 in the morning, and the notice of hearing landed on everyone's door by noon. And even though my hands shook when I signed the verification, I also felt a steadiness I had not felt since the funeral. Because the plan had stopped being a plan and had become a process that moved forward whether or not anyone approved of my tone, and on the morning of the hearing their lawyer finally did the math that I had been doing for days and asked to talk in the hallway, which in legal language means we are ready to stop pretending. The agreement that followed was not romantic, it was a list with signatures, but if you have ever been the person who is told to wait your turn, you know how thrilling a list can be when it is the right list, and it said the trustee would resign effective immediately. A neutral accountant would deliver a full accounting within a set number of weeks. A portion of past distributions would be returned to the account that day from escrow, with the remainder on a fixed schedule backed by a lien on a vehicle I recognized from a family group photo, and management of the duplex would transfer to me as beneficiary manager, with the property manager reporting directly to my new email and my box number on every envelope. And in exchange, I would sign a release only after the accounting reconciled to the dollar, with a narrow non-disparagement clause that protected the tenants and the business, but did not muzzle me at holidays, which, to be honest, I counted as a small personal victory. When the clerk stamped the resignation and the judge blessed the stipulation with a few calm words about families and records, I walked outside and called the property manager to tell her that rent could resume flowing under the new instructions, that no tenant would see a change in terms, and that I wanted a queue of deferred maintenance priced and scheduled before winter so the building would do what my grandmother bought it to do, which is keep people steady. And then I stopped by my new apartment and opened the little metal door of the box that had changed everything and found the first envelope addressed correctly to me. A welcome letter from the accountant with a secure link and a promise of clean spreadsheets. And I laughed at how unglamorous victory looks when it finally shows up and sits on your kitchen table. My mother did not call that day or the next. My stepfather sent one message through counsel about respecting privacy that made me roll my eyes in a way the judge did not need to see. And my sister tried the soft path with a text that said she hoped we could be close again, to which I replied that closeness is not a feeling, it is an audit trail, and that she should send any questions to the accountant because I would not be running the family help desk anymore. And even as I said it, I felt that guilty tug you get when you stop making yourself smaller for people you love. But I let the tug pass without feeding it because the truth is simple. I asked for help when I needed a bridge, and they spent the toll on a view. That night I took the postcard from the drawer where I had stuffed it the week they mailed it, and I slid it into a clear sleeve with the certified mail receipts and the lawyer's first letter, where my forwarding address sits in bold type over the legal notice, like a caption I wish I had written sooner. And I tucked the packet into a file labeled house and another labeled boundaries, and I put both in the drawer that holds the things I will not misplace again, and when I turned off the light my phone stayed quiet, which used to scare me and now felt like a choice I made, because the silence that used to mean exile now means I get to keep what was mine, and if they ever decide to call, they will hear a new message that is not angry or pleading, just final. The number you were dialing has moved. The forwarding address is attached to the notice you signed, and if you need anything else, you can check the record, which, for the first time in a very long time, tells the story the way it actually happened.